One of the most difficult qualities about esports I've found just from observing the way people talk about things is to really get a grip on and a good grasp of the context of time, and then looking back what it means in context of what we know now and what happened since then. And that's something that my career has been heavily focused around, trying to figure out at the time how to explain to someone, like, not just this is like who won a tournament or who was the good player, but the context of like, oh, who else were the good players, like what did their career do afterwards, what happened before. Also, more importantly, sometimes you have that period in time where you know that something happened, but actually something that happened later, which was significant, the seeds of that were back then, and you need to be able to explain how what was going on there, which might have looked like disparate or like it's not connected in any sense. Actually, if you follow the path through this player into this tournament, into this result, into this change in the game, it all comes back to this point, and maybe even goes further back beyond that. So it's a key point in time. In this sense, I was thinking about some of the great different eras and different times in players and teams' careers in terms of League of Legends. And I actually was able to pinpoint that I think if you're a Westerner and you just like intrigue and interest, but still very high-level play and great players, I think one of the best periods of time ever in the history of League of Legends, competitive League of Legends, was in the summer of 2002. And so let's say around, for these purposes, let's say around like August time of 2012. Let me set the stage for you. So around this time, the summer of 2012, first and foremost, the best team in the world, the best team in Europe, and then the best team in the world was the same team. It was Moscow 5, the Russians, Alex H, Diamond Prox, Genja, Edward, Darian. We know these guys. This was when they were on their run of LAN events where they'd won IEM Kiev at the beginning of the year, then they'd won the IEM World Championship, which at the time, since Koreans hadn't gotten it fully involved in and played it nationally, was essentially a World Championship. They beat all the North American teams, all the European teams, or at least they had, and they placed highly. So they were the best team in the world. The M5 versus CLG.EU, Counter Logic Gaming Europe rivalry was in full swing. Like online, CLG.EU had managed to have a winning record over them and had been really good, but CLG.EU hadn't done anything big offline yet. DreamHack Summer had come around. CLG.EU had managed to beat them in the group stage, then beat them 2-0 in the final. Then we'd had ECC Poland in Warsaw, which wasn't that long after, like a month or two after, and again, the teams had played in the group stage. CLG.EU had beaten them then, so they were like 4-0 over them then on LAN. But then M5 came back, M5 smashed them in the final. So now this rivalry, this awesome rivalry, when before no team could really stand against M5, like truly, this awesome rivalry was in full swing, and it was like, wow, what's going to happen next? Like, I can't wait for the next time these two teams are going to meet. They're both not only like elite European teams, but they're two of the best teams in the whole world. And so this was one of the best rivalries, and obviously CLG.EU was led by Froggen as their star mid laner. Meanwhile, Moscow 5, obviously, at the time, one of their most famous players, one of their main carries was Alex H, who was an incredible player. So you even had the rivalry in that sense. Over in North America, you had this awesome circuit going on with like MLGs, IPLs, a bunch of these different events, like multiple MLGs, multiple IPLs. You had like smaller LANs, Gigabyte LAN. You had all these LAN events going on. And just as in Europe, M5 overall was dominating, winning the most events and always placing top 2. You had TSM, and they were winning nearly all these events. The only teams that could beat them was basically like Azubu Blaze when they came over. So North Americans, though, they were dominating these events. They were always getting the better of everyone in the events. They were always placing top 2. In fact, they were basically just winning them all for a while, like 5 or 6 events. In terms of North American teams, you had obviously TSM were dominating, but beyond TSM, okay, now you had CLG, Counter Logic Gaming North America. This was the team where they had probably the classic lineup for a while initially, where they had Saint Vicious jungle, Hotshot GD top lane, Big Fat LP mid, and the awesome bot lane of Double F coming into his own, into his prime, and Chauster. And this lineup was really good. Now, what made this team so interesting? Because this is back when also people would use the potential thing, but it wasn't a joke back then. It had merit to it, because what was happening was, yeah, CLG.EU, even though they would go even with TSM in these IPL, in their MLGs, it wasn't that because they lost, they were like significantly worse, so everyone was like, right, well, they're number 2 or whatever. The reason you could always have this tension that maybe they could be as good as TSM or better in some other context was that TSM were the masters of NA. They would beat all the NA teams, but TSM had been smashed by M5 when they'd played them in Europe, and even worse, TSM were in a position where Azubu Blaze had utterly dominated them when they'd come in the summer. So the sense was, and this really was the way people thought of the context back then, okay, so TSM can dominate everyone in NA, But maybe CLG.EU, with their style of play, which is all matched up well against other countries, and because they've been playing in OGNs and they'd played in international competition, the sense was, okay, well, maybe in terms of strategy or in terms of their lineup, they won't be as good in NA, they won't dominate, but they'll be able to do better against international teams. There'll be more competition in that sense, and maybe they can go further in a World Championship type tournament. That's the way people were really thinking. That's the way it was kind of built and set up in terms of the rivalry between the two teams and the difference in terms of domestic and international. In terms of the Western teams, what made it awesome was Korea was just becoming established at this time. They'd initially set themselves up when the OGN LoL invitation had happened, when their team, MMIG Frost, the Mad Life, although it basically became Frost later, was able to beat CLG.NA and come first place in that tournament. And then in OGN Spring, you had Blaze beating Frost. Then OGN Summer, you had Frost beating CLG.EU in the final. So Korea was becoming established, and you could already see from the teams that had played in these things that they were already very strong. They already immediately were one of the best regions, and they'd had some really strong teams, because then Blaze won the OGN, they came over to MLG Summer and they just destroyed everyone there. So it was clear that, like, okay, the best Korean team is also better than some of the Western teams for sure, in fact dominant. And then you had CLG.EU, really good team in Europe, really awesome Western team, going over and losing narrowly to Frost. So it's like, wow, they really already are at this level. That's another factor that was really cool. You had these two OGN seasons, OGN Spring and OGN Summer in 2012, where Western and just generally international teams were all competing in OGN, like the best Korean league with all the best Korean teams and Western teams involved. So in OGN Spring, you had like Fnatic, you had Dignitas, you had, who else? Fnatic, Dignitas, CLG.NA, CLG.EU weren't in that first one. Was there any others aside from them? I think that's it, actually. Those were the main Western ones. Then in the summer, you had CLG.NA, CLG.EU this time were then. They went all the way to the final, and they almost won it, actually. They were 2-0 up, and they lost 3-2. Froggen was playing awesome in that tournament. You had World Elite played in the summer one. Now, they weren't fully established as the great World Elite we know at the end of the year, but it was cool to have the best Chinese team competing, and Wei Zhao, etc., was competing against Koreans. It was a cool little feature in itself. So you had this international flavour to all the circuits domestically, the international circuits, teams playing in different areas, getting different matchups, rivalries going. You also, what made this a really cool period of time as well was, I'll run down a list at this exact moment in time of who you could say was the best player at every single position in the world, and you'll see what a diverse, varied, amazing set of different styles and skill sets and approaches and innovators in terms of who's on this lineup. And crucially, there's Westerns on this lineup, and it's legit. So top lane, let's just start up on how we normally go down the map. Top lane, the best player at this point in time was Reaper, the player who was the carry top laner of Azubu Blaze. Nick Blaze before, so he'd won OGN, he smashed and dominated, got to MLG Summer final. He went out in the semi-final of OGN Summer, lost to Frost there, and he was just the best top laner, because you have to realise, okay, Frost's top laner, no, it was Shy at this point in time, actually, at that exact moment in August. Shy was only just coming into his own. He was like a rookie. That was his rookie season. He hadn't fully become the god that Shy would become at the end of the year. Macnoom was good, but he wasn't quite at his peak final form yet. Wicked was a good player, but he'd had his problems actually in that final. So one of the reasons they'd lost. Darian's Darian. Dyrus, he's more known as a stable player. He's never like a super carry player, especially in that era then. He was just very good, and he'd got his head kicked in directly by Reaper at MLG Summer. So you look down the table, and yeah, you have to say that Reaper was the best at this point in time. And he was not only a carry, he was like a shot caller. He had all these qualities made into him, made him such a unique player. He was the best top player there. Cerebral mastermind, but also very skilled. Then you look at the jungle position, and Diamond Prox was the best player in the world at this point in time. Innovator of counter jungling, just bullying players, going straight up 1v1, dueling them, beating other teams by taking away all the camps, just knowing when to gank, pressure all over the map. We think now of this low econ style that everyone does, where you play Lee Sin, you play this champ Rengar, you play Kha'Zix, whatever, and you have all these ganks all over the place. Diamond Prox basically innovated that style. He was the one to really make that work. This was when he was in his prime, in that sense, where he wasn't just the innovator. He was the innovator and one of the best players in the world at the time. And at the time, because we hadn't had the Insect era guys come up, his mechanics were fucking amazing as well. In terms of mid lane, believe it or not, the best mid laner in the whole world, just as the jungler was a European, the best mid laner in the world was Froggen. When Froggen played at this point in time, yes, Alex Ich was amazing. He had an awesome team around him that synergized so well with him. That when he would play well, they would play well. They were unbeatable, M5. But Froggen could play, even when CLG.EU was doing badly, It's like he would very rarely ever have a bad game. Even if they did poorly and they didn't win the game, like they lost the game outright, he could still dominate completely. Now, we all know in League of Legends it's very hard to actually 1v9. It's very rare someone can actually do that. So there were games where he would go completely nuts. He would do amazingly. He would play great on a champion, sometimes even be counter-picked and play great. But in this particular scenario, he couldn't win. So his level was fucking amazing at this point in time. And no Korean or no Eastern player was close to him at this point in time. Messiah wasn't like in God mode yet when he was really sick at TF at the end of the year in early 2013. Over in Korea, what mid laners did you have at that point in time? Rapid, Star and Frost wasn't even close to Froggen's level. Ambition was very good. Ambition was very good at the time. He was comparable. You had Toys, who we hadn't seen him fully flourish yet because his best tournaments obviously with the Season 2 World Championship and then IPL 5. So that was later in the year. Who else do you even have at that point in time? Pretty much no one. There's no one else who's on his level at this point in time. Just the EU mids. Oh yeah, Expeke only just had switched to the mid lane position, and his team wasn't good enough. He wasn't in any kind of position at that point in time with the mage meta to be compared to Froggen. So Froggen was actually the best player in the world. At that period in time, I'd say just the best player in the world, but at mid lane, definitely the best player in the world. This was the guy who was by far the best and who had the most game impact of one player. He's also someone where, if you watched that OGN summer final, which sadly I know a lot of people can't watch, especially if you weren't there at the time, because unless you know what you're doing with Google and you can find the right things, you're not going to find a legal VOD. Okay, there might be some up there otherwise, or in other languages or other hosting platforms than the ones you're used to looking at, but in general you can't find those VODs. You can't go back and watch them. But if you ever watch them, he plays fucking unreal in that series. Even though they lose, he's the MVP of the series. Like, it's not like someone outplays him from the other side. Frost as a team outplays CLG.EU, and there are crucial like throw moments or a certain matchup, particularly the top lane, that starts to go really badly for CLG.EU where it's going well, and then it goes super fucking badly the other way, and so lopsided. That's part of why they lose. Froggen played amazingly though. He did, if you want to talk about deserved, even though I hate that term in general, because he was the best player in the tournament and best player in that series, in a sense he deserved to win it. He deserved to be like one of the only Westerners who could ever be like, I won an OGN. On his merit of his play, he's won or lost them the game. He was fucking unreal there. Now, in terms of, if you want to do a bot lane of best players in the world, like the best AD carry in the world, at this point in time probably was already Wei Zhao, actually, if you look at the totality of seeing all the games and seeing their level. Because the reason why World Elite weren't in God mode yet had nothing to do with Wei Zhao. It was entirely to do with the fact that they hadn't had this period where they changed their support and their jungler, and when they were able to change that, that's when they became this godlike team after Season 2 Worlds, where they were already very good. Wei Zhao was fucking amazing already. He had all the mechanics, the positioning, the champion pool. He had everything. He was already amazing. One of the best players there. Probably still the best AD carry of all time, if we're being honest. Support player, this one's obvious. It's Mad Life. The guy, it wasn't until Mata came along, and not only came along, but consistently put up these amazing performances and just controlled not only his position, but then shot called and controlled the whole map. It wasn't until Mata was able to do that anyone knocked off Mad Life. No matter when Mad Life's level went down, Mad Life was a god at this point in time. He was fucking unreal. His mechanics were better than like some of the best Western carry players at like top lane, mid lane, and AD carry. His mechanics were better from support, and he could play make more than some of these positions. It was absolutely amazing. The plays I always said, Mad Life to me visualized that, represented rather that famous quote that says something along the lines of something like a great player can hit a target that no one else can hit, but a genius can hit a target that no one else can see. It's that sort of a concept. The way it wasn't just that he would make a great play, it's that he could visualize a play that no one knew existed and then execute and make it happen in that moment that he's suddenly realizing it. It was just some of the most amazing shit you've ever seen. So you think of all those players there, icons of their positions. What a diverse, beautiful, amazing, intricate, different set of players with totally different background stories and teams and team styles and individual approaches and innovations that they're making to the game, and context between them and then the guy who's the second place and the third place, and totally radically different types of players. What a great scene this was, where it wasn't that you were stuck in some boring meta where it was this champions all the time and it had to be this player here. All these players in their own way could have massive game impact, win the whole game for their team, play any champion seemingly that they wanted of these massive wide champion pools. This added to all the context of the leagues and the international competitions and the particular rivalries and the things that we were seeing blooming, made this point in time, for me at least, probably the true golden age of League of Legends. There were some other times later which were very excellent in their own way, like competition level and OGN, or this team doing great things strategically, this other team setting the bar in terms of like how you can toppled the team who were on top, all these different cool qualities, and maybe I'll do a video about another one of those. But I think overall, right now, I would pick this is my favorite time in competitive League of Legends history in esports. I think it's just one of the best periods. It had everything you could want. There was so few minor qualities that you would say were problems. All this brilliant moments. It was the glorious summer of 2012.